Guitar Shifts. Welcome to the fourth official episode of the 52-Week Guitar Player podcast. As always, I'm joined with my co-host, 52-Week Guitar Player instructor, Kaio Antunes.
Hey everyone, I'm Kaio.
And today on the podcast, we have a very fast guitar player, another Canadian as well, and a good friend of mine, Mr. Roy Ziv.
What's going on, everybody? Glad to be here. Very excited for this.
How's it going, man? How's the week been treating you?
It's been good. It's been good. A bit busy, but it's good. I got some playing in. I got a little bit of practicing in. So it's been good.
So what were you practicing? Like, I just want to start this, because I already know you did a podcast recently telling your story and all that stuff. So if people want to check that podcast out, they can check that one out. But with this podcast, if you're cool with it, I'd like to get like super nerdy about guitar stuff and like what you're practicing. And,
let's do it. Yeah. So this week, and it happens most weeks as well. Whenever I come up with content, a lot of the things I write, a lot of the solos I write are usually either a little too complex for me. I'll just kind of like, if I'm improvising, trying to figure out what I want to play, I just kind of put on a track. I'm improvising for usually a really long time. Usually that happens when I'm procrastinating from doing my work, anything else I got to do. I'll pick up the guitar, I'll just kind of play, put on a back track. I was like, oh, maybe I can make some content out of this. And usually the thing I want to play, I'll kind of record it and it's like very sloppy. It's not quite there yet. There might be a move that I can't quite do. And just sitting there and practicing, trying to get that down so I can actually make a video out of it. That's kind of the extent of my practicing at this point, instead of like the traditional practice, and just sitting down for like hours. I think every week, I don't think a week goes by where I don't spend several hours just kind of improvising over tracks. That's like, some people like to play video games, some people have hobbies. You know, this is my hobby, is just kind of improvising over and over and over.
Gotcha. So that's how your writing process usually goes. Like you'll put on a track and then you'll just start improvising over the track. And
almost every video I've done, especially the skits or any of that, started with me just messing around, looking for backing tracks, looking for some instrumentals of songs, just improvising for fun and be like, oh, you know, this is really cool. I can do something with this, and then trying to think of like a skit around that or a video around that. Or if I can, I'll just solo and upload that as well. But almost all of the videos start off with me just kind of just messing around and improvising for fun. And I was like, oh, maybe I should do a video out of this.
Interesting. I actually have a very similar approach when I come up with what I'm going to play over something like a piece of content or like a backing track. My approach is actually very similar to that. I'll just start out improvising and then eventually I'll play something that I think is interesting and then I'll end up using that, right? But what I find interesting about your track, well, not just your tracks, but I mean like your content and your skits, is everything that you seem to come up with is just so creative, right? It sounds very musical, and not only are you shredding, but you're playing very creatively and it sounds quite nice. So
thank you.
How? Like why is this happening?
Well, I think the main thing comes down to melody. I come from like a pop background. When I was in Berklee, I realized early on, you know, I thought I was good. Obviously, I got into Berklee, and then you realize you're good, and a million other guitar players are also really good, and almost everyone's better than you. And then you go on YouTube, and there's a guy that can play way faster than you'll ever play, and there's a guy that can do licks that they look impossible, and there's always someone better. And I thought when I got to Berklee, I was like, I can't make a career out of this. I'm not good enough. Or if I am, like, there's always better. There's just way too much competition. I got to think of something else. And it was actually in an English class at Berklee, not even a music class, where I realized I like writing songs. We had to do like a lyric kind of thing, and then we had to put into a song. And I played it in class, and everyone's like, "That was really catchy. Like that sounds like it could be like a pop hit." And I was like, "Oh, that's, you know, maybe I could try that." So I listened to a lot of pop music kind of growing up. I've always, you know, aside from like listening to guitar players and metal and rock, I always secretly enjoyed pop songs as well. And, you know, all of them are very, very catchy. And when I kind of started kind of dissecting pop songs and looking into the producers and writers, I tried to kind of figure out how they're making it so melodic, and just kind of being conscious of that and listening to more songs and being very conscious of the melodies and the intervals between all the notes, what makes it melodic, kind of helped with that. And then after Berklee, I worked for a while producing songs for people kind of behind the scenes and kind of working in that world a bit. So I always kind of came from that kind of pop writing background of short melodies and trying to make everything catchy. And then now when I got to this point where I'm uploading content and kind of became a guitar player, I try to apply that to my playing as well. I've always liked guitar players who were very melodic, like Steve Vai. My favorite Steve Vai songs, you can hum, you know. Um, I was always into very melodic playing, so I always tried to approach my playing in the same way. I wanted something that I could hum. All the songs I've written, a lot of them started with me just humming something into my phone and then building the track around that, adding little guitar nuances like slides and bends and stuff, things that I can't hum, but keeping that main melody there. So then eventually it just kind of built into my whole kind of guitar playing and the way I approach it as well.
Yeah, I find that super interesting because not many guitar players, even if they do, won't admit to coming from, you know, a pop sort of background. Like obviously that's not your entire background, but like,
yeah,
as you said, that's played quite an influence.
Yeah, no, I think for sure. I got really obsessed with it. I want to become a pop producer. That was like my main goal for many, many years. I was obsessed with, Max Martin, who's written all like the biggest hits, and all the biggest producers. At any given day, I could tell you the top 100 songs on the Billboard and who produced each one and who wrote each one and who all the writers, the producers. And I was like studying this stuff. I studied this stuff. I was like, I want to make a career out of this. And before I kind of changed directions and went back to guitar, that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I was always very curious at, how to make things melodic, and I think that the key thing that you'll find is just repetition. And there's many ways to repeat things. You don't have to repeat the exact same things, but using a motif, using a rhythmic motif, using the same notes in a different way, just something that kind of repeats itself in a certain way, sequences as well. And that's what kind of makes our ears perk up. It's something they can cling on to. And then they're like, oh, I kind of heard that before. That sounds familiar. Let me keep listening to this. This sounds melodic to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super interesting. And what I find as well kind of common with a lot of guitar players that you see online these days is a lot of them come from a metal background. Mm-hmm. There are some people that come from a jazz background as well. Like myself, I technically come from a jazz background, although I wouldn't strictly define myself as a jazz musician. By no means. But with your background, it's very interesting because it's unlike the norm, right? And that it actually makes sense why you blew up so quickly, like on TikTok, for example, with that approach behind your playing, because you're playing, I mean, pop music is like, by definition, it's popular. It's for the masses, right? Like most people tend to gravitate toward it. And bringing that approach into your guitar playing, maybe that has something to do with your growth, but nonetheless, I mean, I think it sounds really cool and it's good shit.
Thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things I realized it's harder to teach melody writing, but then when you kind of dissect my playing, and I've dissected my playing a lot when I started kind of teaching it more in depth, you find certain things like certain intervals that you use. Realizing that if you hit the chord tones, focus on the third, and obviously the root notes as well as you follow the chord progression, outlining chords, all these little things can help things make it more melodic. And yeah, I think with my solos, every time I solo, there's kind of like a 4-step thing. There's always the main thing that I'm always focusing on is the melody, and that's kind of taking a simple melody, building everything around that, try to stick to that, try to go back to that. Just have something that's kind of hummable that you can hum that kind of sticks to your ears. The other thing is scale sequences, which is just like, straightforward, simple, repetitive patterns. Again, that just goes back to repetition. But with scale sequences, it just helps me kind of navigate the fretboard to get from one section to another in a more interesting way instead of kind of just jumping around. And then I think the third thing, I think is one of the most important things, and takes a very long time to develop, is phrasing. I think phrasing is very, very important. I think with phrasing, that's what takes an amateur. That's the difference between an amateur player and a pro player, at least to me. Someone that can play 3 notes and make it, just phrase it really, really nicely, compared to an amateur player or someone just starting out who can play the exact same 3 notes and it just doesn't sound good. It just doesn't sound professional. So I think phrasing takes a very long time. I mean, I'm still working on my phrasing to this day. I think phrasing takes a very long time to develop. And we can also talk about that. And then the last thing is just licks. All the licks that guitar players learn growing up, all the licks that I've learned, you put all those things with the melody, phrasing, sequences, and then little licks in between all that to connect all that. And I think that's how I build. That's a kind of formula I've realized, kind of looking back and dissecting my solos every time I kind of teach it.
So, I'm interested in one thing here, Roy, that you're talking about your process of dissecting your solos, which I think it's really important. And you dissect a lot of pop songs, obviously. But like you have your speed builder course, and you have some very good videos on your YouTube channel where you are talking about how to read speed well and how to practice that. And I feel like your solos are really well balanced in terms of being melodical and having fast phrases. So how do you approach that?
I think again, I think it's just about a balance. It's about having the right balance. But the key thing for me is having the main solo is always built around that simple melody, something that it kind of starts off with. The speed and everything is just to kind of decorate it and just to make it kind of fancier all around, all the different licks, adding little speed stuff. A lot of the speed is just a run into a note that was in the melody. That run wasn't really built into the melody. I can play the exact same melody in a fast solo without all the speed stuff and the sequences and the cool licks and everything. The melody is still there. And then I just try to add the cool licks and the fast stuff to help me approach certain notes and just add more flair to it. So, and I think having that's kind of what helps the balance between the speed and kind of having that melodic playing and focusing on phrasing as well and feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Nice.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So why do you think so many, like, kind of on that topic, but a little off the topic, why do you think so many guitar players actually struggle with speed?
Oh, that's a huge topic. I think a lot of players struggle with speed because they're practicing it wrong, and this is a little bit controversial, but I think and everyone always tells you, and I used to teach this way at all, so I'm not knocking anyone down, but everyone will always tell you, you want to play fast, practice slow, practice accurate, slowly build it up. Accuracy is the most important thing. Make sure you practice slow. Don't try and play faster than you can. Keep it slow. Don't play sloppy. And slowly practice it. Eventually you'll get there. And the thing is, you might get faster. You'll get to a certain speed, but eventually you'll get stuck. And that's what happens to most players. And they keep practicing the way they've always practiced, and they've gotten to this certain speed and they get stuck. I was the exact same way. I used to practice that way. I got to a certain speed and then I got stuck. And for many years, I couldn't get any faster. I'd practice over and over and over. And I'd maybe get like 5 BPMs faster, 3 BPMs, like literally like nothing, and I just got stuck. And eventually I realized there's a whole different way to practice. And it all has to do, I think the key to it is high intensity, kind of short intervals of notes where you're basically playing just a few notes at a time at much faster tempos, that basically trains your muscles to adapt to the movements you'll need at these faster tempos. Because when you practice slow, your muscles are learning a certain type of movement. You're using certain types of muscles in your hands. You're playing those exercises. You're playing a certain way. And to get to that next level, different muscles need to be used. But you're not even getting there. You're not even engaging those muscles. You're not even engaging that, that brain and muscle kind of thing working together. That's not even happening at these slower speeds. And when I say slower speed, I don't mean slow. I just mean wherever you are and you got stuck. To get to that next level, you need to engage different muscle groups. You need to practice a lot faster. You need to practice at the level you want to be at, so you can actually get there. The problem is you can't play that fast. So how do you practice that? And that's what I teach in my course. And that's what I realized when you play in these short groups of notes, just like a short kind of burst of notes, you can play a lot faster than you can playing a longer run. And if you play with these short notes and you practice it properly, that's when your fingers kind of start to get used to this whole new speed that you've never played at before. And you start training the muscles that need to be worked at to play at these faster speeds. The more you practice this way, the quicker your kind of hand gets used to it. You're also able to, think faster, like you're able to hit all these notes a lot quicker. And then eventually when you kind of bring everything back and you start playing longer runs, you'll find that you're able to kind of push your speed a bit more. So I think traditionally, like the traditional way to practice, players just get stuck because they're just practicing the same way. They're practicing slow. They're trying to practice accurate. And then what I teach as well, which is very controversial, if you want to take it to the next step, is actually getting to that sloppy area where it's not accurate. You practice at these short bursts, but you push it just a little bit more where it is sloppy. You're not playing clean at all. And then you're trying to clean that up, which is like, there's a fine line there. You got to be careful because if you tell a student to practice sloppy, that could, completely go wrong. But I find that for me, when I practice that way, when I started practicing that way, my speed shot up like crazy. Whereas for years I was stuck at the same. I was still fast. I was happy with my speed. I could never kind of get to that next level until I started practicing this way. So I think that's what happens. And again, I think it's just something like all guitar players talk about. I think a lot of guitar players don't realize how they got fast. I used to teach students all the time. They're like, how do you build fast? Slow and accurate. Just keep practicing. Make sure it's, don't play sloppy. And that's it. And then slowly kind of push it. But I think all guitar players that play really fast and don't really know how they got there, all at one point in their lives just kind of pushed it. They're like, I want to play fast. And they were practicing at that sloppy kind of pace. They were just kind of pushing it. They were frustrated. They didn't have any patience. And I think that's where they were able to develop those muscles that you need, that movement, that muscle movement, and that muscle memory required to play at these faster speeds. And I think just many people don't realize that, don't know that. They think they just, somehow just got to that speed. And then when they teach it, they just teach it the same way. So I think that's the main thing that's kind of holding people back from getting faster.
Well said. So do traditional exercises, or does the traditional way of building speed then have any merit to it at all? Like, why would someone do it?
No, 100%, because it helps you build the muscle memory required to learn a lick, to kind of get the muscle memory down to learn something. If you want to play something faster, you got to be able to play it slow first. You got to have the muscle memory there to kind of play it where you're not thinking about it. When you're playing at these insane speeds, you can't think about the notes. You got to know what you're playing down to every single note. Once that's down, then you can start kind of pushing it,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I just wanted to get you to clarify that because I know some people are going to watch and they're going to be like, oh, okay, so just go straight to the fastest tempo and then.
Exactly, yeah. So one thing I always tell people, so when I release my speed course, it says on the page, on the sales page, this is not for beginners. This speed technique, practicing the way everything I just explained, is for when you get stuck at a certain speed. You've practiced for a few years, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, you got stuck. This is going to help you get to that next level. But if you're just starting out, yeah, you got to practice traditionally, just kind of work on your stuff, get that muscle memory in there first, and then take it to that next level. I think the easiest way to kind of explain it that I like to explain to people, it's like if you want to get faster at running, if you're practicing running, you're not going to practice walking really, really fast. You're also not going to practice jogging. You're going to practice sprints because there's different muscles being used. When I walk really fast or when I jog, you're not using the same muscles. You're not using the same intensity as you are when you're going to sprint. You're not going to get faster at running by practicing walking really fast. This is the exact same way. If you want to get to that next level, practicing that same exercise at a certain speed feels completely different. That everything's completely different. The way your fingers move, the way you're holding the pick, the way you're thinking as well. Everything's completely different at these really, really high speeds.
Yeah, 100%. So how does somebody know when they reach that point though? Like say I'm a beginner guitar player and I've only been playing for 6 months or like 12 months and my technique's not even fully developed, right? Mm-hmm. But if I've only been playing for a short amount of time, I have nothing to compare that to, right? Like I don't know what a fully developed technique for me as an individual should feel like. So what would you say to someone who's in that position? Like how do they know when to bump up the tempo so they can actually start breaking through their ceiling?
I think when you're starting out and you have an instructor, or you're learning and you're practicing a lot, you're going to see improvements. You're going to see improvements and you're going to keep improving. you might kind of slow it down a little bit, but you'll still see improvements. I've seen it with all my students. You're going to see improvements week after week, month after month. It's when you get to the point where you're not seeing improvements, that's when you realize, okay, I got to change something I'm doing here is not working.
Gotcha.
But as long as you're seeing improvements, keep doing what you're doing because it's working. You don't need to change anything if it's working, you know?
And that's how you know, guitar chefs.
No.
Right on. So do you think, and this is off topic, like this is on topic, but it's like something different. Do you think that it's easier to build speed in your left hand versus your right hand, or vice versa?
I think my left hand, which is your fretting hand for me, yeah, is way faster. It's much easier to build speed than the right hand. It's also a lot harder to connect the two. And I think that's why you'll see most players play legato, you know, because it's just a lot easier. It just goes, just run down the scale with your left hand and just hit one note with your right hand. And connecting the two is a whole different story as well. You'll find a lot of players, I used to see a lot of my students be like, oh yeah, look how fast I got. And they're just playing one note really, 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 really fast. And I was like, okay, can you move your fingers to that? No, they can't. You know, the left hand might be really fast. The right hand might be really fast. There's no point of practicing just one note like that, unless you're trying to do like just, I don't know, that Van Halen thing, just kind of moving up while playing one note. Otherwise, you know, if you're not able to connect the two together, then there's really no point. But I think for me, and what I've seen with most of my students, and I think that's why most players kind of gravitate towards playing legato, is because your left hand or your fretting hand is a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I actually have a lesson in my program, 52-week guitar player, where I talk about that. Like left hand is, yeah, it's much easier to develop the speed. And I think it's also like, I asked my students one time, if you had to chop off one of your hands, most people picked, they would rather lose their right hand. Because I mean, you could still legato, right? And you could still sound pretty fast. And I mean,
yeah, you can still hit all the notes.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things with your left hand. All you got to do is hit the notes up and down, up and down. Moving from string to string on the left hand is really not. It's really not that hard. You just move your finger up and you're on the next string. With a pick, it gets complicated. Sometimes you're hitting a down. Sometimes you're hitting an up. Sometimes you're inside picking, outside picking. There's all these different movements. You got to make sure you're not hitting the other strings. You got to make sure you're muting. I think that's what makes it a lot more complicated. Whereas the left hand, you just run up and down the scale. You know, it makes it a lot easier. But yeah, even me at this point, my left hand is way faster than my right hand.
Same. Is it the same for you, Kyle?
Yeah, I feel that way, but I just wanted to comment on something that I saw on one of Roy's videos, and I noticed that with students is that even though usually our left hands can be faster, when we have synchronization issues, it's because the left hand is not catching up, so the right hand is faster. Like, do you guys feel that too?
I think I can see that for the students. For myself, though, it depends. It really just depends. What about you, Roy? Same for you?
Yeah, I think I think I definitely agree. Yeah, I think for students as well. For me, it depends as well. I think at this point, my left hand is definitely faster than my right hand. But I think if you break down a synchronization issue, maybe where both hands are working together, sometimes it is the right hand that's maybe a little bit faster, or kind of that, you know, where their left hand just can't keep up with what you're doing, and that's why you got to kind of find that point where they can kind of synchronize. I talk about this in my course as well, how to kind of synchronize both hands, and I'll give you guys a secret because I think it's very simple and it definitely works 100%. You just want to find a point within a lick where you can focus on both hands hitting at the same time, and usually it's just an accent. If you're playing a big lick, it's hard to think about all the different notes, and that's where it kind of gets blurry between your right hand and left hand if the synchronization gets kind of out of your control. But having one note within that lick somewhere in the middle that you can focus on and hit a little bit harder than everything else, just having a little bit of that accent will help. Both hands are kind of focused on hitting that together, and even if everything's a little bit out of the way and kind of they're not playing at the same time, hitting that note, they'll try and hit that note at the same time. They're focused on that, and hopefully that kind of eventually that kind of makes everything just kind of come together.
For sure. And can you explain the difference between inside and outside picking for people who don't know what that is?
It's hard to do without a guitar, but basically outside picking is when you're changing a string, you're picking outside outside the 2 strings. So
let's use pentatonic as a reference. So if you're playing the pentatonic scale, right?
So with a pentatonic scale, if I start with the down strokes, you're playing a down, an up, and then a down. So when I changed strings there, that would have been inside picking, because my last 2 hits when I was changing the strings was an up and then a down to the next string, which means I'm in between the 2 strings. And then when I'm picking again, my next note is in between the 2 strings. Outside picking is when I hit outside of the string. So that would be, let's say, a downstroke on the E and then an upstroke on the A on the next string. That would be, you're playing outside the strings. Inside picking, sometimes people get stuck because you can get stuck between those 2 strings, and there's no kind of movements. With outside picking, you're outside the strings, makes it a little bit easier, and that's usually a down and an up if you're, I guess, ascending up the strings.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is like, so if someone is playing the E string and they pick down and then they pick the E string up, and then when they go to pick the A string, you're saying that is inside picking. Or
yeah.
Yeah.
But did you say down and an up? Yeah.
Down
and up would be outside picking.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, and then an up and then a down would be inside.
Because they're moving toward the A string, right? Like
exactly. Yeah. Basically, if these are the 2 strings, you don't want to get stuck. I mean, you're gonna need to use both. It's not like you don't want to avoid it. You're gonna need basically practice it, because you're gonna need to use it. But you don't want to get stuck between the 2 strings. You get stuck between outside picking. It's gonna be a down and then an up. I'm playing outside the 2 strings. For me, okay. The first time I heard Joe Bonamassa play, I heard him play these massive 6-string pentatonic runs at insane speeds. I was like, this sounds wicked. Never heard anybody do this. Let me try it. And I couldn't do it. And I kept trying and I couldn't do it. I kept getting stuck. And I was pretty good I thought I was pretty good. And I couldn't play these pentatonic runs really, really fast. Until I realized that if I start on an upstroke with the pentatonic, playing any 2-note per string scale, I was able to play it fine, completely fine, without changing anything else, just starting on an upstroke. Now that took some getting used to, because my entire life, my entire guitar life, I always started every note on a downbeat. It's a downbeat, it's going to be a downstroke. That's how I've always taught it as well. And it was hard to kind of wrap my brain around on a downbeat starting with an up. It just didn't make any sense. But as soon as I started on an up, I was able to completely run through all 6 strings of the pentatonic at a much higher speed. And when I started on a down, I just couldn't do it. And that's because when I was using a downstroke, it would be a down, up on the E string, and then a down on the A string, which would be inside picking, and I would get stuck. Trying to play that really fast, I would just kind of get stuck. All I had to do was change that to outside picking by starting on an upstroke. So that would be an up, a down, and then the next string would be an up. That means there's a down and an up between the 2 strings. I'm playing outside. I didn't get stuck, and I was able to play the entire thing. And that completely changed like everything for me. That was, if you hear a lot of my playing, you'll hear a lot of pentatonic runs. That only started like at my last year at Berklee is when like I figured that out. And that's watching Joe Bonamassa, and I was like, why can't I play these licks, And my playing changed completely because of that, because I started introducing all these like 2-note per string pentatonic runs into my fast playing, which I never had before. It was always 3-note per string, shreddy type stuff.
And that's crazy. And I'm saying this because, first of all, I agree with the thing that I usually teach students, especially in the earlier levels, that you should, downstroke with a downbeat and get used to that kind of thing. I think it's important also for when you're strumming chords and all that. But for me, inside picking is a lot easier. I have a problem with the outside picking because of the time it takes you to go around the strings. So for me, that's a lot harder. So I'm just kind of, surprised that this.
That's
is the
interesting.
case.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. That totally makes sense. Yeah, because you got to travel outside the pick, hit that up. Definitely makes sense. Yeah, definitely interesting. So I used to practice Paul Gilbert's like signature lick a lot when I was younger. I was obsessed with Paul Gilbert, and you know how he has that 4-note lick, the where it's like 3 notes on the B string, one note with an upstroke on the E, and then he goes back to the B, and he just repeats that over and over. And he has that one where he just kind of goes back and forth between the B and E, and he goes back. And that's outside picking. And I think that's why I got so used to it, because I used to practice that religiously. You know, because Paul Gilbert uses that in every single one of his licks, every single one of his songs.
Oh, that okay, that makes sense. So if I, in retrospect, I think about it. There's a type of lick that's similar to it that I've always practiced. That's actually it's the same notes if you think about it, but it starts on the E string, right? So you do da 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 da, and if you start down, then you have an inside picking.
Inside picking, yeah, great. Okay, so it's just what you practiced for so long. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Interesting. How
That's
about
very
you,
interesting.
Brandon?
Yeah. Sorry, what? How about me?
Yeah.
Like if I'm playing a 4 notes lick and just repeating it?
No, like, is it
No.
easier for you to play inside or outside?
Oh, well, it would definitely depends, but actually, so fun fact for those of you watching, I actually bought Roy's course a while ago because I wanted to see his secrets, become a faster player. And in one of those lessons, you talked about inside picking versus outside picking, and you referenced the pentatonic scale, and you said how when you're playing 2 notes per string, you in the past would start with a downstroke, so you'd play the entire scale, like assuming we're ascending the scale, right? So we're starting on the low E and going up to the high E. So there's 2 notes per string, and you said how you were starting with a downstroke, and that's always what I did as well. But you said how you made that change. I guess you said that was in your last year at Berklee. You realized that because you taught that in the course, and when I learned that, it changed the way that I played the pentatonic scale as well. So now I do the same. I'll start like a 2 note per string pentatonic lick with an upstroke, and then, but unless I'm descending. So if I'm starting on the high E and then descending down to the low E, then I'll start with an upstroke because on my way back, or I'll start with a downstroke because on my way back, it's now inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, I've never had an issue descending. It was always for me ascending up the strings, and that's where it completely kind of changed the game. And I started to notice a lot of, after I figured that out, I was watching other players kind of run up any 2 note per string kind of thing. A lot of them were starting on an up, and I was like, oh, maybe there's something there that makes it a bit easier. But I've also had students, I've been teaching this concept for a very long time. I've had students that just couldn't do it. They're like, no, starting on a down is easier for me. So at the end of the day, and this is with everything, with how you hold the pick, do you want your kind of hands stretched out? Are they curled in? Are they tight? So whatever's comfortable for you and whatever works, just stick with that, because there's literally players that play like this. They're incredible, So
no, it's very true. Like, have you ever seen how Pat Metheny holds a pick? He holds it like so fucked up. It's like,
really,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Yeah, there's
Metheny.
tons of players. I remember the first time I saw Tosin play with his thumb like kind of all bent back, and then you have what is it, Marty Friedman, I think, who also kind of his kind of wrist is kind of looks like it's like bent backwards.
yeah, like scooping, like a
Yeah.
scoop.
George Benson, he kind of like hugs the guitar and he holds it like this, but like his speaking technique is crazy fast.
That's the thing. Yeah, you have players that do it in every type of way. That's why I always say, I was like, whatever's comfortable for you, just kind of stick to that. I do everything kind of the traditional way, but
Yeah, it's just difficult because some people don't know what the best way, like they don't know the best approach, and they don't have enough experience to even like, test different ways. Like you have to have like years of experience doing one way to then realize that, oh shit, this is actually not the most efficient way. And then you try something else and then you level up. But I mean, that's happened to me a couple times throughout my journey. I'm sure it's happened to you guys.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I changed the way I hold the pick to do faster technique stuff, and my conclusion was a very weird way that I kind of hold it like this. So I also use a big pick. I kind of hold it like this. It's a bit weird. It's not all the time, but sometimes I do it. And I turned to this because it was easier to get some speed. I could get better sound because I was only playing jazz at the time, getting cleaner tone. So yeah, just like I said.
Yeah, very interesting. So, by the way, did Berklee live up to the hype? Because there's a lot of people that you know, it's Berklee, right? Like, did it live up to the hype?
Um, I think you could probably get the same education at any music university. I think it's all kind of the same. But Berklee, what's cool about Berklee is it's like music 24/7. You're surrounded by musicians. If you're in the dorms, you know, you go down to the practice rooms at any hours of the day, especially like at night, and everyone's practicing and you know everybody. But the coolest thing is you have, you know, international students from all around the world. So most of your friends are not from America, they're not from Canada, you know, they're from Argentina, they're from uh Jamaica, they're from Korea, they're from all these places. So you're learning their music and you're learning the styles of their songs and how to properly, you know, kind of play their stuff. And you're being introduced to all this music you've never heard before. And the cool thing, I remember at Berklee, everyone was sharing like massive music libraries with everyone. There was like a software that everyone had, and you could basically like whatever class you're in, everyone would have it on. You could basically steal like everyone's songs, which was really cool. So you'd be introduced to like all these songs all the time. And I think you learn a lot just from being surrounded by music all the time and being surrounded by all these international students, and just jamming nonstop. It's definitely cool. Does it live up to the hype? Yeah, I mean, they have great facilities. It's awesome. You're in Boston. It's a great city. The students are all amazing. Everyone's great. You know, every few weeks you have like a famous musician come by and give either a clinic or a show. So that's cool. But in terms of education, like I think you could probably learn the same thing. I did look, you have teachers there who have Grammy Awards, who've worked with Michael Jackson and all these big, you know, um musicians, but just because they have the experience doesn't mean they could teach. So I've had classes with incredible instructors that were just amazing, and whatever everything they taught just kind of clicks, and it was incredible. But I also had some teachers that just couldn't teach. But you look at their resume and it was insane. They worked with like the biggest artists and have done so much, and they have Grammys under their belt and all this stuff, but they couldn't teach. You go to their class and you're like, what is this guy talking about? Like it just doesn't make sense, and you have to kind of learn it on your own while taking the class. So, and I think probably every university has that as well. At the end of the day, music is, you know, music theory is all the same as long as you understand it. So I think you could probably get the same education at your university, but just being at Berklee, there's something magical about it. I think, you know, it felt really cool just kind of being there. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if it lives up to it or not.
Well, what was your goal going into Berklee? Like, and is it the same goal, or like, has it changed over time?
Well, going into Berklee was always the goal. It was always the dream. My dream was always to go to Berklee. You know, when I started playing, I was a huge Steve Vai fan. Steve Vai went to Berklee, and then you find out that all your other favorite musicians went to Berklee. Al Di Meola went to Berklee, and all these other guys went to Berklee. And I was like, okay, Berklee is the place to be. I got to get to Berklee. Berklee's the goal. But also none of them finished. None of them graduated. So the goal was never to finish Berklee. There's like a funny thing at Berklee. They say if you graduated, you failed. You know, because most of the musicians that made it from Berklee didn't graduate. They didn't finish. You know, you go to Berklee, take a few classes, a few semester, and somehow you get picked up by a famous musician, and that's it. Now you go on tour and start your career. You know, that's just kind of the spot to kind of start at and then go from there. And if you end up doing all 4 years, you kind of failed. But for me, kind of going into Berklee was just kind of I wanted to learn jazz. I wasn't a jazz player. So I was always interested in that. I wanted to understand that properly because I always struggled with that. I wanted to understand my theory better. My theory, I could answer it on a test perfectly, but I never understood it. You know, and I realized that like you could teach it to someone, they could understand it. They could answer a theory test and get it perfect, but it just doesn't click. They can't use it in any way. And it wasn't until I got to Berklee where everything kind of clicked. Like it levels up very, very quickly. Start with the most basic stuff, and next thing you know, you're taking harmony level 5, and it's like insane stuff, and you're breaking down some insane harmonies, and you know, voicings and voice leading and all this crazy stuff. So understanding the theory definitely like I think took my playing to a whole other level. But I don't know. I don't know what the goal was. Kind of getting to Berklee. The goal was to get to Berklee, and then once I got to Berklee, it was like, you know, I don't know, start a band, start some stuff. But at the same time, you're there and you realize you're like, damn, everybody's really good. I was like, can I really make a career out of guitar? I don't think so. I don't know. At the time there wasn't really social media. People weren't really posting stuff online, so that really wasn't a thing. That's where I kind of shifted, and I was like, okay, I'll just be a music producer. I really enjoy that. Forget about guitar. And after that, there were many years where I barely picked up the guitar. Like I just picked up the guitar to play like some stuff on my recordings, but I didn't practice. I didn't really care.
Yeah, I mean, it probably wasn't a total loss because you learned a lot of valuable skills. Like, I mean, from the music producing era, Roy, right? Because
Mhm.
like, I mean, obviously you've got chops, and like you probably honed your chops, and you honed your theory chops as well while you were present at Berklee. But you also honed your music production chops, and that's something that I don't have honed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really, even after Berklee, when I started working with all these other producers and stuff, understanding the software, understanding all these little tricks, dissecting pop songs to try and like kind of reverse engineer what effect they did and how I could also do it as well. Definitely helped my production stuff, especially when I was first starting out with content, because I would just make a track, improvise over it, upload it, make a new track, improvise over it, upload it. And then when I wrote my EP, my first EP, I produced all that myself as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's super cool. And being able to create your own backing tracks as well. I pay a guy for that because I don't do that. But as well, I'm just curious, like, how did you find jazz? Because like that's what my degree is. Like I just went to a jazz, like I was in a jazz program, right? Like the school that I went to wasn't a jazz school. It was just it was a university, but they had a jazz program. Because east of Montreal, it's the only place that has one. Everything else is classical, right? And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what your take is on jazz and like how it's affected your musicianship.
So I think jazz is a completely different world. I think people come from the rock world. Sorry, people come from the rock world, don't really understand how like different jazz is. You could tell someone who's listened to jazz their whole life and studied jazz and plays jazz compared to someone who kind of was brought up on rock music or any type of normal pop rock type of stuff and then learn jazz. Um, and so for me, kind of going into Berklee, I was like, all right, let me learn jazz. And I talked about this in the before as well, but my first lesson I remember with my private instructor who was like this huge jazz guy. Um, Basically, we were talking about some stuff, and then he gave me this piece to learn, and I came back the next piece, and I played it the way I would play it. There were bends, vibrato, there were slides, all this crazy stuff that I would always add in my playing. And he like ripped me apart. He was really, really angry, ripped me apart. He's like, we don't do that in jazz. That's not it. And I respected it. Well, at first I was like, well, that's annoying because I think all this stuff sounds cool, but I kind of respected it too because I was like, you know what? I'm here to learn jazz. Let me learn this properly. Let me learn it the way they do it. I'll take from it whatever I want after. I'll apply it to my playing, and that's it. And I got to a certain point, where I could play it and where I could write the lines. I wasn't very advanced at it. I didn't get to the point where I could just improvise over like, giant steps type of thing. But I could probably write a solo over giant steps because I understand the concepts of that, but I wouldn't be able to just kind of improvise over it or improvise over any like very difficult like type of changes. But I got to a point where I kind of understood it and I was able to apply what I want from that into my own playing. I think with jazz is you have to listen to it, and that's where people kind of mess up where they try to learn it and they just can kind of get through a certain block. You got to listen to it, and you have to understand the lines and the music behind it and the phrasing of jazz to be able to actually play it properly. I listened to jazz a lot when I was at Berklee, but not enough to fully understand it. All my friends there weren't jazz musicians. Once were all the people that I did meet that were incredible at jazz grew up, that's all they played were just jazz, and they sucked at rock music. They couldn't do anything different. you know they couldn't play anything different. Their bends were awful. They couldn't play with distortion. There was so much noise. They didn't know how to clean up their playing. But when it came to jazz, they were phenomenal things I wish I could do. So I think it's one of those things where if you play jazz, a lot of it has to do with listening, and you really have to listen to the music and understand the musicality behind that to be able to play it properly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wonder how many people, just thinking about it, I wonder how many people are skipping this part of the conversation because they don't give a damn about jazz. But Circling back a little bit. So when you were going through and learning all that theory, I guess this maybe isn't so much a question, but just a comment. I always find that when it comes to guitar students, at least, there's, and I don't mean like music students, but I mean like, you know, like my own students or perhaps your own students. There's always like, broadly speaking, there's students that are really good at theory and they have a lot of theory chops, but when it comes to like actually feeling the music and playing well, they kind of come up short. And then it's the opposite as well. You have people that can play and they play with a lot of feel and they've got a good ear, but their theory chops are minimal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have any students like that?
What was the question? If I have any students like that?
Yeah, like do you have students that suck at theory but can shred? And do you have students that are great at theory or and can't shred? And which is more important?
I think, well, it's a lot easier to, if you can already shred and play, to later learn the theory and then apply it, you know, you'll be a lot better. It'll all kind of click. The problem is getting the student to realize that he needs to learn the theory when he can already play is like a big hurdle, because usually they're like, well, I can already play, so fuck off. Like, you know, I don't need to learn all this stuff. I was the same way. I tried to learn it. I got a lot of books and I learned, like I said, I could answer it on a test. I had it down and I could play well, but it just didn't click yet. It didn't click until I got to Berklee and I properly learned it in the proper steps. Plus it advanced very, very quickly. And that's when it all kind of clicked and I was able to actually use it as well. Kind of, when I say use it, you don't really use it. It's just there. It all kind of like, it's like language we're talking right now. You know, there's all these things we're doing in our sentences, but we're not thinking about it. You're just kind of flowing. And that's what it kind of comes down to. It gets to the point where everything just clicks and you don't need to think about it, you know? But yeah, I do think it's easier when you can already play and then kind of learn the theory. Learning the theory and then playing. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever had someone who kind of had the theory down perfect. And then, you know, and then I had to kind of teach them how to play to kind of put that together.
Well, they can usually play a little bit, but it's like, okay, you know what I mean? Like they can play a little bit, but for some reason, like I think it's just left side of the brain type people that, you know, they're good at math and shit, so they're good at theory.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to like the being creative and, you know, playing cool lines and shit, it's a little lacking, which is, it's so interesting about music. Cause I know, because I know you like somewhat personally, I know that you're definitely like a dual side of the brain type dude, because you've got it both. Like, cause you're like, what you play is super creative and everything. But I know just like when it comes to your knowledge of business and everything like that, I know that, yeah, like, you know, congrats to you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with both things. I've always been fascinated with the theory side of things and the more analytical parts of things, but always kind of creativity as the backbone of it. I've always been creative and like try to, you know, get that down as well. And then having both and, you know, focusing on both and trying to get better at both is a great combination.
Yeah, I feel like this other situation where the person knows the theory well but has a hard time playing. I feel like it's more rare than, you know, than the other way around. But I've seen it happen, and I feel like it happens when people are really smart and they can understand the concepts and they have all that, but sometimes they don't have a lot of musicality in the way that they, you know, they didn't have anyone that played in their family. And of course you don't have to have, but you know, like they didn't listen to music so much with, you know, just by, by just because, you know, like just listening to music or whatever, that kind of thing. And also I see this happening a lot with people going to jazz, because jazz, there's a lot more of those rules, like right and wrong, what you should and what you should not do. And you know, god forbid you played a perfect fourth on a major chord, because you know, jazz police will fucking arrest you. So yeah, you know, the people start to get scared and they are only worried about doing what's right and not doing what's musical. And I know because I've been there. So it's really hard to break out of that and just because musicality is something that you can train, right? You can listen to music, you can work on that, but sometimes it can be harder, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So as well, this is a fun question. I think I saw, because you're on a podcast recently, you guys were talking about NAMM a little bit. You're not going to NAMM?
I don't think I'll go to NAMM unless something changes at the very last second. It's in a few weeks, right? Or is it mid-April?
I think. I actually had a student ask me about it, but I don't think I'm going either. So.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna go, but I'm still, maybe there's like a 5% chance that I'll just be like, you know what, let me just buy a ticket and go check it out on just a little vacation.
Well, I just bought my plane tickets to Toronto today.
All right.
So, yeah. We're going to be collabing, me and Roy. You're going to see some collabs in the future. If you have any ideas for a collab, make sure you let us know in the comments. I'd be curious.
It's going to be a fun week.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And yeah, like NAMM, I saw on that last podcast, and also I've just heard you talk about NAMM, and like you didn't have such a good experience one time at NAMM because you were working with a brand, and
I was mostly in the booth, so I didn't really get to kind of check it out during the day. And when I did, I don't know, maybe I just needed to be, I just kind of walked through everything, kind of check things out. A lot of the things you couldn't check, like the coolest things, there was always like either a line or a shit ton of people that you couldn't really get through to really try. And if you were trying it, it's like for a few seconds, or a few minutes, and you can't really hear it because there's so much noise. It's insane how much noise there is. The thing is, it's really cool at NAMM because everybody's there. At least when I was there, you look around and it's like every 2 seconds you're seeing a person who you've looked up to your entire life, like standing right next to you with their friends. You go out at night drinking anywhere, at any of the bars, there's lots of parties and lots of concerts. You're seeing everyone, like you're standing behind you, like, oh, there's this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. So you're meeting a lot of people, and that's really fun. So the networking part of it is really, really cool. But yeah, I guess I just didn't get to experience it properly. So that's why I would maybe one day want to go and see it. But from the little that I did get to walk around, I don't know, I was like,
Yeah, I mean, I've never been myself, but for me, the only reason that I would really want to go would be to, hang out with other guys that are in the space, right? I don't really give a shit about like the show, like all the gear and everything. Like I don't care, man. Like I'm just not really interested in that kind of thing, like gear and But on the subject of brands, what's the most annoying part about working with brands? Because brands reach out to you all the time.
Yeah. So, well, we talked about this recently. I think you know what I'm gonna say, but I think the most the most annoying thing about working with a brand is I get brands reach out just like you and some of our friends as well in the space. Brands reach out all the time wanting to collab, do a video. A lot of the times they either, won't even talk about payment or they'll ask for your rate. Now, for me, most of the time when I give them my rate, they either two things happen. They either don't answer or they'll be like, sorry, this is above our budget. And that's it. And the conversation is over. And I think it would be a lot easier for these brands to just start out the email with like, hey, we love your playing. We want you to do a video on this. We'll send you the product. This is how much we're willing to pay. Yes or no? Because the thing is, it might be lower than the rate that I think I'm worth for that week. But if I have a week where I'm not that busy and I don't have a lot going on, I don't mind doing it for a lot less. It might work out where if I don't have anything going on that week and they're like, oh, we can only, pay you this much, I might take on that job because I have nothing else going on. I don't mind doing that. That's completely fine. But they don't even start the conversation with that. And I don't know if it's because they're hoping that maybe your rate is less in their budget, so they don't want to tell you how much they can afford, or how much they're willing to give, hoping that maybe you'll say a lower number and then they're saving some money. But I think it would make everyone's lives a lot easier if they just started off the email with, hey, we love your work. We want to work with you. This is the product. We'll send it to you. And this is how much we're willing to pay. Or I find that even if I do say my rate, negotiate. This is too much for you. Okay, let me know. We'll talk through it. Other brands, when it has worked out in the past, where they were paying my rate, it worked out flawlessly, and we built a relationship, and I worked with them for a very long time. And it worked out for both of us. I just find it weird how every email, and I get multiple emails every week from all these brands. Sometimes we work together, sometimes we don't. And almost every time it's the same thing. They don't talk about this. They either don't even mention compensation at all, or if they do and they'll just ask for your rate, you'll give them your rate. They'll either, it's too high for them, so they won't even answer at all, and that's it, conversation's over. Or they'll answer and they'll be like, sorry, this is too high for us. And that's it. And like, conversation's over,
Yeah, I mean, it's like business 101. If somebody gives you a price, like they give you a quote and you don't want to pay that, come back with a counter offer. I mean, like, this is business 101.
The first music video I ever shot, when I first approached the guy, it's like, hey, how much would it be to shoot this and this? He gave me a price. I couldn't afford it at the time. And I was like, I can't afford that. How about this? And he's like, yeah, you know what? Sure, why not? I don't have anything going on. I was like, okay, great. And then from there, we built a relationship, and I was able to hire him, more times. But if he just said to me, sorry, this is my price, and I was like, okay, I can't afford this, I'm not even going to answer him, or I'm just going to be like, okay, never mind. I would have never shot that video. And I just find it odd that these, some of these businesses will reach out and,
Yeah, man, it is what it is. So I've got some questions
from the brands that I have worked with. You develop a relationship. I think it's great. I think there's a lot could be said for that, and it works out both ways because they end up pushing your stuff, you end up pushing their product, especially if you like the product. It works for both parties really well. I think that's the thing with all brand deals and stuff. It's a two-way conversation. If I'm going to promote your product, if you're going to send me a free product and you want me to like talk about it in my videos, are you going to share that? What are you going to do for me? And vice versa. If I'm just starting out and a brand's like, would like to, yeah, we'll endorse you, we'll give you this. What are you willing to do for us?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes sense. By the way, I've got some questions from IG, if you're interested. Right. Yeah, so threw up a story. You guys aren't following me on Instagram. You're on cigarettes. You got to follow Roy as well, and Kyle. You just got to follow everyone. So one of these questions is, what's your height?
Whew. I'm just under 6, so maybe 5. Maybe like 5'11", 5'10", 5'11".
All right. So this guy is like, why is he so funny? Why are you so funny, Roy?
I'm funny?
I guess.
I don't know.
I never thought. Funny. Yeah, I didn't know you were funny either. I thought you were like just lame.
Thanks, Brandon.
Okay. Based on your personality, looks, etc., if you were a guitar, what would you be and why? I don't know. It's kind of a strange question.
I would be a Stratocaster.
Why?
I don't know. That's just the first thing that came to mind. If I was a guitar, I think I would be a Stratocaster. I don't know. It's got the classic look. I think it's very cool. Most guitars are built based off of that Stratocaster style.
You don't have to finish that if you don't want to. It's kind of a lame question.
Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, I think a Strat, it would be cool. I mean, I'm happy playing Music Man. I love playing Music Man. I don't want to play a Strat, but I mean, Strats are great. But if I had to choose a guitar to be, I think it would be Fender Stratocaster.
Really? I would be like a Walmart guitar. Easy. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I guess I would just be a classical guitar. But not for classical music. It's the kind of classical guitar that has like the cutaway for playing like popular music.
Gotcha.
I don't know why.
So this person said, I purchased Guitar Speed Builder. I want to know when you're adding Hindi subtitles.
All right. Well, good to know. If you guys want whatever subtitles you want, whatever language, let us know and we'll add that. I could probably get that done hopefully by the end of the month, we'll add some Hindi subtitles. No problem.
Look at that.
Uh,
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking for subtitles, and for the past, like, since I've released the course here and there, people were asking, "Hey, is this course in Spanish?" No. All right, I'm not gonna buy it. Hey, is this course in Chinese? No. Okay, I'm not gonna buy it. And then I think when was it, like October, November? I was like, you know what? Let me just sit down for a few weeks and just figure this out, and just let me just get this all subtitled. So I think right now, as of today, there are subtitles in Chinese, Korean, and Spanish. And we're gonna add a lot more. But yeah, all you gotta do is shoot me an email, let me know, and if there's enough people want that specific language, we'll go ahead and do it because it's very time consuming.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, it's cool because that's kind of what Mr. Beast has done, right?
Yeah,
With his YouTube videos. Yeah, I think if there was a bigger market for my program, then I would have to do that as well. But my program is more expensive and a lot of people just can't afford it. So this person said when he started to play guitar. So when did you start?
I started to play guitar when I was, I think, 12 years old.
And how old are you now?
I am 31.
Do you have to think about that one?
I was like, do I want to say how old I am? Yeah, I'm 31. I started to play when I was about 12 years old. I took it very seriously at the beginning.
12-year-old Roy was all about business.
Yeah. Actually, I used to skate as well. I used to skate at the time, and then my guitar teacher was like, nah, you can't skate anymore. You're going to break your hands. So I was like, all right, no more skateboarding, just guitar from now on.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true though. It's like I guess at that time were you considering a career? I mean, like, because if obviously if you have a career in it, like you can't compromise your hands. But back at that age,
I mean, I'm sure at that age, all I wanted to do was play Back in Black. So that was my main goal, and that's it. I don't know if I was thinking career, but.
And did you achieve that goal?
I did. Yeah. You know what? I was never confident in playing that lick. Obviously, eventually you learned the song. I remember getting to high school. Every time I played that song in jams and cover bands and stuff, I was never confident. I was always like, playing that lick, even though I thought I played it fine. Until like a few years later, I figured out how to get that proper kind of phrasing on that one note that he kind of bends slightly to make it sound just like the song. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to phrasing that properly. Everyone can play, or not everyone, but eventually, most students can play Back in Black and can play that lick fine. But that one note on that second fret with the G string, that he has like a slight bend, slight vibrato on, getting that properly is, I think, the key for that song.
Oh, that's interesting. So, how did you like got to play that properly? Because I'm curious.
I think it was just listening to it. I think got to the point where I was like, every time I played it, I wasn't confident with it. I was like, I'm missing something. This isn't right. I'm not playing it right. And I think it just got to the point where one day I just sat down, just listened to it again, and I was like, how can I get that proper phrasing? How can I phrase it like he does and get it to sound kind of the same? Okay, I gotta start it with a little bit of a bend, only add vibrato, only add like 2 or 3 kind of like movements, and then go to the next note. Add a pull off. Don't bend too far. I don't know what, is there a slide? Am I starting with it already kind of bent? Stuff like that. And then when I started kind of thinking about that more and listening to it as well, I was able to properly kind of play it. But yeah, I just remember in high school playing it all the time, and I was like, I'm not playing this right,
Yeah, it kind of comes back to what you were talking about earlier, like one of the differences between an amateur and a pro is phrasing, right? And like that riff is it's such a good riff to use for an example for phrasing, because I actually also struggle with that riff. I didn't know what I was doing wrong until I eventually learned that, like, when you play that pentatonic lick, like you know what I mean? When I was younger, I would start that lick on the downbeat, and I didn't realize until I was a little bit older that it actually starts on an offbeat. And then I was able to play it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just one of those things. But yeah, that's where phrasing comes in. You know, I think phrasing is very, very important. I think that's the difference between a professional and an amateur. Could completely change your playing. That's the difference between a professional playing like a few notes, 3, 4, 5 notes, even just holding a note and it's sounding amazing. And you're like, wow, this sounds great. And somebody else playing a ton of notes and it just doesn't sound good. You know,
Maybe it's worth
there's
diving into that a little bit. So how does one actually get better at their phrasing if they're, you know, amateur right now? Like, how do they bridge the gap?
when you're learning a lick, when you're learning a solo, when you're learning a lick from someone, let's say you're taking one of my lick packages and you're learning one of my licks or any one of my solos, listen to the phrasing, listen to the way I slide up to a note. How far was I down the fret when I slide up to that note? Did I even slide up to that note? Am I sliding up to the note? Are you adding that slide? Why didn't you add that slide? I slide up to that note. When I build my solos, I focus a lot on the phrasing. I'll build a solo and then I'll sit down and I'll consciously be like, okay, where can I add a slide here? Should this be a bend or should I pick it? Should I pick it on the G string or the B string? And I'm talking about the exact same note because they're going to sound different on the B string and they're going to sound different on the G string and they're going to sound different on the D string. It's going to sound fatter even though it's the exact same note. So when you're learning somebody else's solo or somebody else's lick, listen to the phrasing and try and copy it. Try and copy it exact because all people focus on is the notes. They're just focusing on the notes. And the notes, you know, if you have your technique down and you're able to listen and you have the tabs in front of you, you'll get the notes down and you'll play it exact. But it's not going to sound the same if you're not going to phrase it right. You know, so listen to the bend. How far is he bending? Did he bend right away or is he building up to that bend? Did he slide into the bend? Is he raking the strings when he bent or is he just hitting that one note? All those little tiny things make a huge difference, massive difference. And I think phrasing is just one of those things. It takes a while to develop your own phrasing, but it starts with that. It starts with kind of listening to how other players are phrasing things, and maybe don't copy it exact, but maybe just be conscious of phrasing. And when you start developing your own solos and licks as well, try and phrase it in different ways. You know, that's actually one of my next courses is going to be just on phrasing and all the different techniques that I personally use and how to kind of build that. But for someone just kind of starting out, don't just learn the solos or the licks as they are. Also listen to the phrasing and how that player phrased certain things. And that's going to just give you a whole different perspective on things.
Yeah, well said. And I agree. It's interesting with phrasing because when people are earlier in their guitar journey, they don't actually think about it. And it never crosses their mind because they're so worried about actually playing the right notes and, you know, being able to like stretch their left hand and synchronicity, right? And they like phrasing just isn't something that they think about, right? But it's so important.
It's also, I think a lot of people don't really realize what phrasing is. I think that word gets kind of tossed around a lot. And I think phrasing and feel go hand in hand as well. You know,
I agree.
Phrase things can add or diminish the feel in your playing because feel is also something that a lot of players don't kind of get. You know, I was the same way when I started. I talked about this in my in the other podcast last week, but my teacher would call me up and would say bend a note, and I would bend a note and be like, you have no feel, and he would hang up, and that's it. And I would sit there for hours trying to figure out how, how do I add feel, you know, how do I play with more feel? Like, do I add more vibrato? Like, I didn't quite get it, and feel also takes a long time to develop.
Yeah, that teacher showed you a lot of tough love, right?
Yeah.
But how did you responded? I mean, you're an amazing guitar player, so you responded pretty well to that style of teaching.
I responded well to it because I was very motivated by who he was and what he was and everything about him. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to dress like him. You know, I wanted to go wherever he went. I wanted to, you know, play the same music, listen to the same music. So for me, it worked. I know a lot of, you know, some students that kind of teaching wouldn't work for them. You know, having that tough kind of love and being very hard on someone. I remember one time taking a bus to his house. He gave me a small test because I wasn't kind of, it was something I didn't quite practice, and I failed it. He's like, "Hey, go home. We're canceling the lesson. You didn't practice. You're wasting my time." You know,
Wow.
it was those kind of things, and it just, for me, it was fine. Like, it pushed me to practice. It worked out for me. I could see how maybe for some people it wasn't, but for me, I was just very motivated by him, you know, and I wanted to impress him, obviously, and I just wanted to get to his level of playing. So it definitely worked out, and I'm still friends with him to this day.
Right on. Yeah, it's interesting because that style of teaching certainly doesn't work for everyone. But that was the style of teaching that I as well responded to the most. Like I was like there's like the nice teacher approach, and then there's like the more hard ass approach. And that's why I teach the way that I do, at least in my YouTube videos. When I'm with my own students, you know, I try to, you know, get a feel for the type of style that they would be the most receptive to. But for myself, yeah, it was that tough love, man. Like, kick my ass.
Mm-hmm. It's also fun. Teaching that way is just fun because then the student will do whatever you want. And I know that if you do what I tell you, you'll get good. But it's not easy, you know, and a lot of students aren't down for that. I've had a few that were. I had a few students that I got into Berklee that I helped them kind of, you know, practice enough to get to that. And that's where I was like, if you want to do this, it's not going to be easy. But I'm going to give you the proper stuff to practice. And I promise you, if you practice what I tell you enough, come back every week, you'll get in, but it's not going to be easy. And whoever was down to do it eventually got in, you know?
100%. So another question that I had from Instagram, somebody asked, and this is kind of like what we talked about things that would be relevant to this, but he asked, how do I get better at pentatonic soloing? And there goes my video. I'll be back.
Getting better at pentatonic soloing. So pentatonic is amazing. You can do everything on the pentatonic scale. It's every guitar player's go-to scale for a reason. It sounds great. There's some players that only use a pentatonic and they're, you know, world class. I think the first thing you need to do is make sure you know all 5 shapes. Most people don't. What I find most people do is they'll use the first shape and they'll use the 4th shape because those are the easiest places to find the root. You know, the root is on the E string for the first shape, and then the 4th shape, the root is on the A string at the beginning of the scale. So most people are just kind of jumping back and forth between the first shape and the 4th shape, and maybe here and there going into other shapes, but they don't quite know it and they don't really know what they're doing. I think the first step is to just kind of get all 5 shapes down and be able to improvise in each shape as well as you can on the first shape. Know where all the bend points are, because you can't bend the same way you are on the first shape, and the second shape, and the third shape. Know where all the bend spots are, all the different slides. Once you have those down, you can improvise on each one of the shapes. Try and connect all the shapes together. Go make sure that you can play between the first shape and the second shape, and the first shape and the third shape, and first shape and 4th shape, and then connect all the other shapes together. Also, on each string, basically, you want to get to the point where the whole thing, all 5 shapes, becomes one scale. As well as right now, all these players can improvise on just the first shape. You should be able to do that with all 5 shapes and seeing that entire fretboard as one main scale. When you get to that level, that's when you'll kind of level up with your pentatonic, and things will start making more sense, and you'll be able to get like different phrasing, you know, different sounds, different licks going, aside from the basic kind of pentatonic licks that people kind of get stuck with.
Yeah, 100%. And it really is that simple. It's just people still won't do it because it takes work.
It's not only that it takes work, it's the first shape works on everything and they've gotten so used to it, and some people get really good at it. They get really good with the first shape and maybe the 4th shape as well. So for them, every time they're like, all right, this, you know, it's a hard work to kind of get all these new shapes down. I haven't learned a new shape in a really long time, and I don't really see the value of it. I mean, this shape sounds so much better. I can bend wherever, like at the end of every single note. I can't do that on the second shape or the third shape. So why would I do all this? But there's a huge benefit. Like once you do, it'll sound great. Your playing will change. Is just put in the hard work a little bit. You know, if you were able to do that on the first shape, you can do that on some of the other shapes. Although the first shape is the easiest, obviously. It all starts on the same fret. You know, it almost kind of ends on the same fret. It's very, very easy to learn. So some of them take a little bit more time, but if you can get to that point, yeah, you know, just put in the work.
Yeah, reps, baby. All about those reps. So I've got another question for you here. What does your fiance think of your guitar playing? Do you serenade her, or is it like, does she not give a fuck?
Who asked that question?
That was me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because my girlfriend, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think like my girlfriend likes it when I play, but I don't play for her much.
Yeah, I don't think maybe at first, like here and there, where I don't even think I haven't really serenaded her, I would say. Um, yeah, I mean, we live in the same kind of condo. She always hears when I'm playing. She always hears when I'm practicing. Actually, you know what? There's a part in my album where when I was recording it and writing it, we were on the phone, she was on speaker, and I was working on this one part, and I showed it to her, and she's like, "That sounds weird, like it's too repetitive." And I was like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "What should it be?" She's like, "I don't know, just hold that note or something." I don't know. She did something random and she kept going. And it worked. I changed it. And I didn't think about that. And I was like, wow, she doesn't even play guitar, but she was right. You know, does that mean I have to give her credit on the song now? But yeah, I don't think, she minds too much. She kind of gets used to it. If I play something cool, like if I'm working on something, if we're eating after, she'd be like, "Oh, I heard." Obviously, she'll hear me play the same thing over and over and over again a million times. So she'll be like, "That was cool." I think when I practice exercises, that could annoy her maybe, because it gets repetitive over and over. You hear the metronome, and I'll practice for like an hour, 2 hours if I'm practicing my speed, and it's the same exercise over and over and over and over. So I can see how that could get annoying for someone. But overall, I think she's pretty cool with it. She doesn't mind.
So, I mean, I know this question was to Roy, but just to comment on my situation, my wife, she's actually a musician and she's a singer and a vocal teacher, but she's like not one of those singers that don't know music. She knows it. So, and we work a lot together. So sometimes I'm like playing with her and she stops singing and she goes, "No, no, don't play the seventh in that chord. I just want the triad." This kind of bit different of the dynamics here.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, because she just hearing like if I were jamming with a singer and they said that to me, I would immediately be impressed because it's like, wow, you actually heard the seventh.
Yeah, no, I remember finding out this about her before we started dating because we were friends for many years. And then I remember we were going to play something together, and I played the first chord of a song, and well, it's a Brazilian song, and I only played the triad. I only played notes on the triad, and the melody actually started on the sharp 11th, and she nailed that right away. I
Wow.
was like, damn. So, yeah.
I was always impressed with singers who kind of understood the theory and stuff. At Berklee, all the theory classes are the same, whether you play guitar, whether you sing, whether you do all that. And I felt so bad for singers because I would sit there in a theory test and picture the fretboard and be like, boom, boom, boom. Okay, there's the answer. Like it was so easy for me to kind of see everything. It was so simple. And I was like, how does a singer do it? They have nothing to look at, unless they know how to play piano. But I was like, damn, it must be. But obviously some of them can do it, and some incredible singers out there.
Yeah, that was the case with the singers that I knew that actually knew some theory. They would always picture a keyboard, they told me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So something recurring theme on these podcasts, usually toward the end, is gym stuff. So you started going back to the gym recently, and like you've been going hard. How's that going?
It's going well. I feel like I'm, slowly putting on some muscle, and I feel great. I've been going a lot. But the tummy's still not coming down, so yeah, it's gonna be a lot harder than I thought. Everyone's like, "Oh, that takes a really long time. It's very tough." I was like, I could do it, and yeah, I realized it's gonna be a lot harder than I thought. But it's good. It's going well. I realize, now that I started working out more, I'm also eating a lot healthier. After the gym, like the entire day, I'm not gonna want to drink a pop or, uh, you know, grab McDonald's or anything during that week because I don't know, you just feel good. You want to make sure you're eating clean as well. So that's a side benefit that I didn't really think about when I started, taking a bit harder with working out. But I've been very consistent, and I'm excited to see where I am in like 3-4 months from now. By the time you get here, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly, right. We'll hit the gym together, and we'll do some squats, do some bench press. It'll be good. Before we wrap things up here, what would your advice be to someone who is feeling frustrated with their guitar playing and they're practicing, at least they say they're practicing, and they're putting in the reps, and they're still not seeing results?
I guess it depends whether they're not seeing results, whether they're practicing. A lot of times, if they're doing it on their own, grab a teacher, take a lesson, 1 or 2 lessons with someone. The cool thing about now with all these online guitar players, some of them, teach on Skype, so you don't need to go to like a local music store and be scared that you're gonna get some, a random guitar player that can barely play that will just teach you out of the book. You're getting players that you can see that they can actually play, and just grab a lesson or two, and just having a teacher sometimes just kind of tell you what you're kind of doing wrong to get to the next level sometimes helps. But I guess, yeah, it all depends on exactly what you're working on. But yeah, a lot of it is just kind of consistency. Sometimes if you reach a plateau with your playing, you just got to change something with what you're doing. I would need to be more specific what they're not seeing results with, because if there's speed, then there's a different answer to that. If it's musicality, there's a different answer to that. If it's creativity and scales, there's a different answer to that. I think it all depends. What about you? What would you say?
What advice would I give to someone who feels frustrated? I would say you don't have to always practice things that make you miserable. You can practice things that you enjoy as well, right? I think there needs to be a balance of practicing technical things that are just going to improve your chops. And then there's also a very important component, and that is practicing things that you actually enjoy, because that's the reason you picked up guitar in the first place. You didn't pick it up because you wanted to be able to play scales at 200 BPM at 16th notes. You picked it up because you heard a song probably that you enjoyed and you wanted to be able to replicate. So just don't forget about that. And that makes the painful kind of practice feel easier.
Definitely agree with that. Another thing is just learn something else, something completely different than what you're doing, Maybe learn some licks from a player you haven't tried before, or learn some jazz licks if you don't play jazz, or some metal licks, or learn a song in a completely different style. That kind of sometimes opens things up to just seeing a different perspective.
Totally. Actually, while we're at it, and what do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I guess you have to be a bit of a researcher. Even if you have a teacher, you gotta be able to self-teach a little bit. And I know you and I, Brennan, we talked about this with online courses, well, because of 52-week guitar player. But I think that even if you have an in-person teacher or something, you have to be able to self-teach a little bit, because some things the answer is easy, and even because nowadays you can just go online and search for it. But this kind of research that you are with the instrument, and you gotta figure something out there, like whether it's a symbol, a chord, like in the theory how a D minor is put together, and you also know that you got that first D minor with an open chord at the beginning of the fretboard. But how can you play a D minor elsewhere if you don't know how to play it? You gotta be more proactive in just trying to figure things out by yourself. Like, be creative, solve problems. I really feel that sometimes students can lack this part, just because you have a teacher. So yes, yeah, just explore, be creative.
Yeah, like the critical thinking component applies. It applies everywhere. It applies here. Cool. And where can people find you, Roy?
They could find me in Toronto. No. Find me at royzivmusic.com. Roy Ziv Music on all social media: Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, whatever new platform it'll be. Hopefully I can take Roy Ziv Music before somebody else takes it. So yeah, Roy Ziv Music everywhere. If you want to check out my courses, that's royzivmusic.com, or Google me and any of my course names as well. I have a course that will teach you how to play faster, basically using everything we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, with a proper practice section that uses exercises that build on top of each other. That 100% works. I promise you it works. I have thousands of students. I've seen the results. I've seen it with my own students. I use it myself. And if it doesn't, you'll get your money back. It's that simple. I have another course called the Hexatonic Scale Masterclass that basically teaches you how to map out the entire neck. So and a few other lick packages and other courses as well to teach some of my other stuff. That's all on royzivmusic.com. So.
And what's the discount for the Guitar Chefs, the Guitar Chef audience?
Yeah, we should definitely do that. Yeah, I'll definitely hook you guys up with a discount, and we'll add a little link or something.
Cool. And on that note, that will conclude the episode. Thanks for Roy to being here. I really enjoyed this conversation, man, and I'm really looking forward to visiting you in Toronto in June. All right?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all we got. Cheers.
52-week guitar player is once again open for enrollment. Enrollment will remain open from March 16th until March 31st, or until 100 new students sign up, whichever comes first. This program is for you if you want to improvise a solo anywhere on the neck in any key, finally clean up your playing and stop sounding amateur, actually play what's in your head, understand music theory and how it works, write things on guitar that you never would have thought of, increase your speed, get your playing roasted and get consistent feedback, have a second pair of eyes holding you accountable, have live interaction with professionals, or participate in arrangements. That's also just the tip of the iceberg. To get the full explanation and hear all the details, click the link below. You'll be taken to this page. The video on this page will explain your problems to you better than you could explain them to yourself, all the details of the program, and some frequently asked questions. And I hate to be an asshole, but the longer you wait, the less opportunity you'll have to sign up, because we're capping the amount of students that we let in. As long as this page is still up, you're good. But once it's down, you've missed out. To make the experience more personal, we have to have this cap. Thanks for your understanding. So get off the cigarettes, click this link, and I'll see you on the other side.